welcome everyone to another episode of the Harvest Family Podcast. Javier here, and I'm excited to have us here because we want to encourage, equip, and empower you to parent at a whole new level. And I'm very excited because I have a very special guest, someone who's very dear to my heart. I call her actually my Texas mom. Marianne Connor is here, and she is joining us because we want to have a conversation about parenting and our personalities and a specific tool called the Enneagram. Marianne has been doing a lot of coaching and study around the Enneagram. I'm glad her explain that here in a second. But I'm just excited to have you here on the show, Marianne. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's just such an honor and a privilege to be here. I am just so enjoying reconnecting with you and seeing your beautiful family and all the great things that how God is using you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Marianne. Well, Marianne, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, share a little bit about where you're from and kind of like the journey you have been going through using the Enneagram.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a true Texan. I was born in Dallas. I've lived here all of my life. I have spent the last 16 years of my life in ministry working on staff at a local church in the Dallas area. In fact, that's how I met you many years ago. I am the mother of two grown children and a beautiful granddaughter, Georgia Ann. She's 6 months old, and I'm a little bit Twitter-hated. Thank you. Yeah. So about 16 years ago, God called me out of being a stay-at-home mom, and he said, I have something for you where I can get to use your gifts and your passions. And there was a position available on staff at our church, and I got to begin working in our youth ministry. And one of my great joys was getting to work with people who are interested in going into ministry and youth ministry. And that's how I met you. And that was just such a sweet thing. But during those years that I've been there, my role has evolved into different things. And now I'm currently still there working and leading a group of adults. I'm the director of our Bible communities at that church. And I've enjoyed that. But about 5 years ago, God began to speak to me and whisper to me that there were some new things he wanted to develop in me. And so I began taking some coaching courses, which led me to a coaching leadership certification and then later an Enneagram certification. And I have just fallen madly in love with the Enneagram because of the absolute truths that I have found there for my own spiritual formation. And what I have found as key truths I want to share with other people, which has led me to creating a coaching business. And I have the privilege of doing one-on-one coachings. I train, I do trainings, I speak at retreats. I teach, and I get to do podcasts with old friends. So that's where we are.
Yeah. Marianne, that's so good. And man, I can go back and I think we can spend this entire episode just talking about stories in student ministry in Dallas together. Just all the students and all the crazy stuff. I will say, you know, one of the things that you contributed is that you actually designed an incredible summer camp without knowing it, where you gave this idea for us to all come together on the beach in Alabama, and a Florida man who lived in Texas. I will always thank you for convincing us to go to the beach for camp because I needed to be by the water. And
yes, you did.
In Dallas, there's lakes, not the same as the ocean.
No. Yeah. That's so great. I love that. I remember that.
It was such a good time. Well, let's talk about the Enneagram here. You know, for many of us who maybe heard the word Enneagram, it's, you know, a lot of people categorize it as a personality test, but as you know, it's so much more than that. So for us who maybe not as familiar with the Enneagram, or maybe just dabble a little bit with it, or just heard it as a buzzword, why don't you, Marianne, explain what the Enneagram is and what does it reveal to us about our personality?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people like to, when they hear about the Enneagram being a personality assessment, they automatically compare it to a Strengths Finder or a Myers-Briggs, which is, you know, super popular and really helpful to a lot of people. But the thing that the Enneagram is it doesn't just tell you who you are or what you're good at and has you stay in that and, you know, enter into that space, but it also kind of opens up the areas in your life where you're weak or where your struggles are. It reveals to you blind spots as well as the beautiful things that make up who you are. But the real key is it doesn't just tell you what you do, it tells you why you do it. And when you can get to the bottom of why you behave or think or feel the way you do, it can just be so freeing. I love the Enneagram because it's connected to the gospel. You know, it reveals to us very transformative things that can help us in our spiritual journey. And it's a tool that we use in as we are becoming more self-aware of who God created us to be. And hopefully you can get to the place where you embrace who God made you to be. And if the Enneagram is a tool that helps make that happen, I think that's a win-win.
Yeah. Well, that's so good. I know I can definitely relate to that. And I love what you said there is that it helps you, accept who you are, accept who you are, because I know for many people, and I've dealt this in my personal life where, we don't question our identity in God, but we can question almost how God created us, or why, ask the question of like, why are we designed this way? Why do I act this way? Why do I find this way when I'm stressed? And, I hear what you're saying is that the Enneagram provides answers to that.
Yes, it does.
It provides insight and answers. Yeah.
It's absolutely not shy about talking about what your core fears are, or your core desires, or your core weaknesses. It's not shy about that. It doesn't hold back. And I think something to keep in mind is as we think about we are all made in the image of God, as we're doing Enneagram work and learning about the 9 lenses or the 9 types, although you should resonate with one core type, we don't want you to forget that you are have attributes of all of the types, because you're made in the image of Christ, and God is all 9 types. He is perfect, and so since we're made in his image, we have the opportunity to have all of the beautiful attributes. But that also means we might struggle with all of the areas of struggle too. So learning the Enneagram gives us language around that, so that when it bubbles up and it comes out, we can capture it. We recognize it.
That's so
and we
good.
can capture it, and we can lay it at the foot of the cross, Javi, and we can say, Lord, please forgive me for the resentment that I am feeling in my heart right now. And now I know where that resentment is coming from. It's coming from a place of my needing to control and my core fears. And I just give that to you, Lord. Will you free me of that? And so that's
such a freeing thing. Yeah. I mean, wow. That's such freeing, because imagine, Days, I know we're talking about parenting here, but just like in any aspect where you're just feeling that stress and you are self-aware to recognize like those buttons being pushed, those stressors, those triggers that you have, and you're just able to pause and give that up to God. And it's not that like God takes away the stressful circumstance, but now you're able to live into that fully in the way that God has intended you. That is, I think that right there would be freeing to so many people out there who are looking at it. And Marianne, you mentioned that there's 9 types on the Enneagram. Is that correct? You mentioned 9 types. Can you go ahead and kind of go through like kind of each type and explain like these stressors and like kind of what type of personality you can maybe find yourself in there and kind of how they work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to think about the Enneagram types as 9 lenses. So if we all had different sunglasses on and each of our lenses was a different color, if my lenses were green and your lenses were red, you're looking at life through the red lens, which is different than what I'm seeing and feeling and thinking through my green lens. And so the Enneagram, as you learn about each of the 9 types, really the work begins when you really begin to search and dig and discover what your own core type is. But the second step that's equally as important is to learn what are the attributes of all 9 of the types. And that is so that you can not only have empathy for yourself, but also for others that you're in relationship with, and have a greater understanding of maybe where they're coming from. I will tell you that it's important that you should never type other people.
Wait, say that one more time. We might need to hear that. Wait, what was that one? Just repeat that one more time.
As I go through these 9 types, you're going to be tempted to think in your head, oh, that sounds like my husband, or, oh, that sounds like my child, or, oh, that sounds like my sister. And so then they must be that. And so as an Enneagram coach, I have people on a regular basis saying to me, guess what type I am, or what type am I? And really my answer is always the same, is it's not my job to tell you what your type is. It's your job as a believer in Christ, somebody that wants to grow and evolve and change and become more Christ-like, to do the work of self-awareness and understanding yourself better.
Yeah.
And if you using the tool of the Enneagram is a great way to do that. So you should never type other people. And the other reason that you shouldn't is because, when we are in relationship with each other, we see each other's behaviors, or we hear the words that we're saying to one another. But we don't know why you're behaving. I don't know why you're behaving the way you are, Javi.
Yeah.
It could be, you might be motivated because your motivation might be that you always need to be right. Or your motivation might be that you need to get a job completed. So those are two different Enneagram types. You're still, so I don't know if that makes sense, but you yourself are the only one that understands what is motivating your behaviors and your actions. We on the outside only see what you allow us to see, but you are the only one that knows what's going on inside. And that's why you should never type anybody else. You should never use the Enneagram as a sword where you're poking at people. I know married couples that are tempted to do that all the time, get frustrated. Oh, you're just acting like a 4, or, something like that. That's not very nice. And so we should not use it as a sword. And then we certainly should never use it as a shield, which is something that we would hide behind and just refuse to change.
And that, I would say that's actually one of the things, like, if I can just say this, I'll say it, is that it kind of annoys me about some personality assessments, is that, people would like find their personality and they would make a mistake or even make an excuse. Be like, well, that's just my personality. Right. Oh, that's just classic type 8. You're just showing up here. Sorry, guys.
No,
and it's,
they use it as an excuse. That's not okay. And that's certainly, if you are doing that with the Enneagram, you are missing the entire point. Because it is really about movement. It is about growth. The deeper you get into the Enneagram, you learn about levels of health. And so that way you begin to recognize when you've veered off down into the ditch. The Enneagram has been compared to a GPS. You need to know where you currently are, which is your core type. But then you also need to know where you're headed, which is your core type in its most healthiest place. And then when you veer off into the ditch is when you're unhealthy. But there's ways to get back onto the right path and get back where you're headed. And so.
Yeah, that's really good. So, Mary, why don't you go ahead and get into those 9 types here, and kind of let's explore those a little bit before we get into like the parenting application of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 9 types, and each of them has a specific name that kind of is a descriptor. Each of the types has a core fear, a core desire, and a core weakness. Some people will call those a core sin. And then each of the types has a message that they kind of believe that is typically a lie. It is a lie, but they also have a core longing that the gospel matches that in with truth. And so I just thought it would be a good idea to kind of go through those for each of the 9.
Let's do it.
If you're somebody out there that this is brand new. So we'll start with the type 1. The type 1 is the perfectionistic reformer. And their core fear is of being wrong, bad, evil, inappropriate, or corruptible. So then their core desire would be to have integrity, to be right, and to be virtuous, or to be the good boy or the good girl. So what happens with the type 1 is their core weakness is resentment. And that comes from a place of having such a very high standard of being right and perfect that they get frustrated with themselves and with others, that they cannot live up to that unreasonable standard, and they get frustrated that you do not have. So their core sin that they are constantly battling is one of resentment. And the thing to remember about our type 1s is that they have a very loud inner critic who is constantly berating them and telling them that they need to be better, thinner, faster, whatever it is. And so anyway, and so a message that they may have learned or heard or perceived when they were younger is that it's not okay to be wrong or to make mistakes. They may have had to become little adults themselves, or they may have had to be the responsible ones. And so that is something they carry with them throughout their life. But Jesus tells us something different. Jesus tells us what is truth, and that is that you are good. And so a type 1 is longing to hear that we are good, no matter how perfect or imperfect we are, actually. So
Good.
yeah, that is the kind of the makeup of our type 1s, perfectionistic reformers.
Okay. So.
All right. And so that takes us to our type 2, which is known as the helper or the befriender. I love the befriender acronym because I have so many friends who are type 2s, and they are great friends. They are catalysts for lots of good friendships and all that. So their core fear is of being worthless or needy or dispensable or unworthy of love. Their greatest desire is to be loved and to be wanted. And because they have such a need to be needed, their core weakness ends up being pride, because they believe, when they're unhealthy, they believe that they alone can provide all that you need in order to be happy. And so they many times will insert themselves into your life in order for you to make you believe that you couldn't live without them, in other words. And so that's an extreme example of an unhealthy 2. But that's coming from the fact that when they were younger, they may have grown up believing that it's not okay to have their own needs, or that they can't be loved unless you need them. And that is the lie that the enemy likes to tell us. And so then what we are longing to hear from the gospel and from Jesus is that you're wanted and loved for just being you, not for what you provide.
Yeah, well, that's really good. And I know I did not classify her this way, but she has told me that my wife is a type 2.
Oh,
so
I love
that's
it.
so that's a really good thing. And what you said there is like spot on in describing her.
Is that true?
And yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. She is. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why our dynamic works so well, is that I feel like, our kind of, our qualities kind of like complement each other in that
That's
regard.
so great.
And and I think that's also too why she's such a great mother, because she is great. That's good.
So great. I love it.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, let's go type 3. What do you got for us?
Yeah, type 3, they are known as our successful achievers or our performers. And so they are operating from a place of fear. They're afraid of failing, of being incompetent. They don't want to be exposed or unable to appear successful. They don't want to be inefficient. And their desire is to be valuable, to be admired and respected, and to be seen as successful. So what happens with our successful achiever performers is that they are trying really hard to become who they think you want them to be in order to feel, achieved and successful. They love being in front of people. They're natural leaders. They've got excellent attributes, but many times they have deceived themselves of who they truly are, and they have they're working really hard to be who they think you want them to be. And so their core weakness is one of deceit, not deceiving you, but they have deceived themselves of who they truly are. Yeah. And so their message that they may have heard is that they're unworthy of love unless they've earned it through achievement. And then their core longing is that they are loved and valued for being themselves without having to earn it. And we know that God loves us unconditionally, which is the message and the truth that we need to be telling ourselves.
Yeah. That's interesting. Hey, quick question on that type 3 here. Because you mentioned that, a type 3 would deceive themselves, right? Trying to, please or get to the standard someone else places for them. So is it possible that, as a type 3, maybe you're trying to be another type, like a type 2 or a type 6, type 8, something like that. And then you realize like, oh, wait, that's not me. I'm actually a type 3 and I've been deceiving myself. Is that a common trait in them? Am I reading that correctly?
Usually a type 3 recognizes the achiever performer in themselves.
Okay.
Maybe it's a little bit more difficult for them to recognize how they've deceived themselves.
Okay. I see what you're going there. Okay.
Yeah, it's not, there's two ways to look at it, but it's more about, they definitely understand that they are performers. They get that.
Gotcha. Okay.
But they really struggle to figure out, why am I performing? Why do I feel like I need to? Why do I feel like I need to achieve this? Why can't I just settle and rest in the fact that, good enough is good enough, or, it's okay if we don't get the goal accomplished. They're
Yeah.
very goal driven,
Yeah.
and they can be workaholics.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha.
So yeah. And so moving on to the 4, which is our romantic individualist. These are awesome people, but they are operating out of a fear of being inadequate, mundane, insignificant. They do not want to be emotionally cut off. And so then their desire is to be unique or special and to be their most authentic self. Our 4s are operating from a place of envy. They believe that you possess something that they don't have. So they feel like they have a hole inside of them where there's something missing. So what happens is when you are envious of what others have, what do? You're constantly comparing. And so they are constantly comparing what others have that they don't believe they have. Their message may have been that it's not okay to be too functional or too happy. So many times our 4s kind of end up being kind of in more melancholic type personalities.
Okay.
They actually do feel all of the emotions, and they're very authentic in those emotions. These are the people that can sit with you in your grief or in your heartache because it's very familiar to them. They're not afraid of that. They're not afraid of emotions because they have all of the emotions and they're comfortable with all of those.
Yeah,
so if they were believing the lie that it's not okay to be too functional or too happy, then of course the gospel tells them, and they long to hear, that they are seen and loved for exactly who they are, and that God has provided all that they need, and that they are complete.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So number 5 is our investigative observer, and their fears of being ignorant, invaded, or having obligations placed upon them. Their desire is to be competent and capable. Our 5s are usually people who are very smart. They love to research. They love to read. They love to gather knowledge, all those sorts of things. Small talk is not really their thing. But because they actually have an internal battery life that's only at about 20%, they believe that they have to hoard resources such as knowledge or time or relationships or energy. And so what happens is their core sin is avarice, which is kind of like greed, but it's not greed for monetary financial gain. It's greed for inner resources. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they have struggles kind of putting themselves out there and giving themselves away freely in relationships or emotional, feeling all the emotions with you and all that sort of thing. So,
yeah, that's good.
So the message that they may have heard as a child is that it's not okay to be comfortable in the world. But the message they long to hear is that their needs are not a problem. So, yeah. Our type 5s need a little bit more time to process their feelings. They struggle. They're very much in the head center. And so they're very, very much in their mind. And so they struggle to access their emotions. So they need a little bit more time to process what those are. So what about the 5s? Yeah, so our 6s are known as the loyal guardians or questioners. Their real struggle and they operate out of a place of fear itself. They fear being without guidance or support. They fear being alone or of abandonment. Their greatest desire is to have security in all ways. And so this takes them to a constant feeling of anxiety, which is their core weakness. They are the people who are constantly scanning and preparing for worst case scenarios. We need them in this world because they are the ones that are most prepared when an emergency happens. And the reason they're most prepared is because they've already thought through what should happen if this other thing does happen.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So they're asking a lot of questions and they're looking around and they are constantly kind of living in this heightened anxiety space. People
Gotcha.
have even said that they are actually the bravest of all the Enneagram types, and that is because they live in
Okay.
a place of anxiety more than the rest of us.
Interesting. Interesting.
Their message that they may and lie that they may believe about themselves is it's not okay to trust yourself. And so then their core longing is to know that they are safe. And we know that when our assurance is in Christ and our hearts are at rest, he gives us that
Yeah.
that safety and that security. So
That's so interesting. This is so good, Marianne. Keep going. It's so good. So
so let
good.
me ask you this. Are you, as I'm describing this, are you thinking about people in your world that
I'm
kind of
trying not to. I'm actually
I
trying to
know.
see I'm pretty confident I know my type, because I've taken a few assessments before and I read a few things, but as we're
Mhm.
going through this again, there is the type 3. I'm going, I see a lot of qualities in that one as well. So as
Sure.
you're going through, I'm kind of more of me self-examining,
Yes.
but I'm trying, not to think of people. Why are
I
you?
know. It's natural. It's
Yeah.
natural for
Yeah.
us to do that.
Yeah.
And so, but hopefully when you hear
Yeah.
about the core fears and the core
Yeah.
motivations, then you have a little bit more understanding of the
Yeah.
people that are in your circle.
Yeah.
But on that, I just don't want to miss an opportunity to tell you, I would love to sit with you and do a typing session with you sometime
Okay.
where I can just ask you a bunch of questions and kind of help narrow down,
Yeah.
from 9 to 3, and then maybe
Yeah.
hone in on one.
Yeah.
And hopefully by the end of our conversation, you would have a more confidence of
Yeah.
knowing, yes, for sure, that is my type.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. Let's do it. Let's put
Yeah.
it on there.
Okay.
So, well, cool. I think we're on type 7 now. Is that
Yeah, we're
correct?
almost done with this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sevens are optimistic enthusiasts. They are so much fun. Um, but the reason they're fun is because they don't want to deal with pain, and they will do anything in their power to not think about pain, not feel pain, not, enter into pain, because their greatest fear is of being deprived or being trapped in emotional pain. Their fear is of being limited or bored or missing out on something.
Mm,
Our FOMOs.
yeah.
And then their greatest desire is to be happy, satisfied, and content. And so what happens is, because they are trying so hard to stay away from any emotional pain, they fill their lives with stories and adventures and activities, and they're on the go, and they're kind of scattered, and they're kind of,
Mm,
they don't want to stop long enough to deal with
yeah.
what's actually in reality. And so that is coming from a core weakness of gluttony, and their
Mm,
glutton is not
yeah.
necessarily of food, because we automatically think of that, but it's actually this frenetic escapism that
Mm,
happens because they are just a gluttony for life, in
yeah.
other words.
Yeah.
And so that's coming from a lie that they've believed that it's not okay to depend on others for anything.
Mm,
And then their core longing is to be at rest and to be satisfied. And they need to believe that rest comes from Christ and not from living a life like Peter Pan, where you don't ever want to grow up.
The Peter Pan. I'm always gonna remember the type 7 now is Peter Pan.
Oh yeah.
Got it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We can,
That's the
talk
yeah.
about characters that will help you remember all of them. And so that brings us to 8, who's our
Yeah.
challenger, sometimes known as the boss. And these guys have gotten a bad rap, but they are really, really wonderful people that we need in this world. And I love them dearly. They are fearful of being weak, of being powerless,
Mm,
being controlled, and of being manipulated. And so when you have these fears, everything that you do comes from that. And so you're going to try very hard not to experience any of those things. And so
mm,
their core desire is to protect themselves under all circumstances. And many times they turn to in order to protect themselves, they are the first ones to kind of they love verbally sparring with people. They
mm,
tend to be a little bit more harsh and direct with their
mm,
communication style and that
yeah.
sort of thing. Sometimes that can be in an effort to push you away because they want to protect themselves. They don't want you to get too close.
Gotcha.
Um, And so their core weakness is lust, but it's lust for excess. It's not necessarily a physical type of lust. And so their excess is that they are constantly needing to push everything and everyone in order to assert themselves, because they feel more comfortable in a place where they are being able to assert themselves. They have a constant need for intensity and control, because that's like a protective barrier. It keeps you from seeing what's the vulnerable sweet spot that's on the inside of them. And so then the lie that they may have learned and heard as they've grown up is that it's not okay to trust anyone or to be vulnerable with anyone.
Gotcha.
And so once you can get an 8 to be vulnerable with you, it is a beautiful, beautiful, lovely thing. And their core longing is that they do not want to be betrayed. And so we, of course, know that Christ, who was betrayed, will never betray us.
Gotcha.
And so our last one is our peaceful mediators, our peacemakers. Sometimes I actually like to start with our 9s, which when you look at the Enneagram symbol, they sit at the top of all of the circle. And I like to say the reason they get to sit at the top is because they see everyone else's perspective except their own. And so they operate from a place of wanting to create harmony and peace under all circumstances, which kind of takes them, unfortunately, to a place where they delete who they really are. So their fear is of being in conflict. They fear being overlooked, of being loveless, or being inharmonious. And their desire is to have inner stability or peace of mind. Because they tend to merge with other people and other people's passions, desires, dreams, rather than having their own, that turns into a core weakness of slothfulness, which is not laziness, but it's a slothfulness of being asleep to who they really are and what they really want. It's easier. It takes less energy for them to just ride your coattails of where you're going in life than it does for them to find their own voice and to find who they really are, because they have lived a life listening to the lie from the enemy that it's not okay to assert yourself and that their voice does not matter. And so their core longing is to hear and to know that their voice matters, that they matter, that Christ sees them and loves them.
That's so good.
So,
man, I think you just described all of humanity in 9 personality types. That was so good, Marianne. And what great word pictures that we have. And, one thing that you said earlier, and as we connect this to parenting, is that when you look at these 9 different types, and you don't call them personality types, you just what would be the best kind of term if I say just the 9 types of the Enneagram?
I think lenses is a good
lenses. Okay. Yeah, that's a great word picture. Yeah, we'll use that. So you have these 9 lenses in which, you view yourself, and then the person that views the world, as well. And, obviously there's a correlation, because as parents and as we parent as well, it's a common thing to first, if we want to parent well, we have to make sure that we're loving ourselves and, understanding ourselves first. And
Absolutely.
we can't just hop into there. And you actually kind of going back to what you said is hey, don't, categorize other people. I know in our conversation, you used to don't even do this with your kids. Don't categorize your kids with a certain Enneagram, at all. And I want to get to that in just a second. Can you just explain to us a little bit, how this, understanding these 9 lenses will help our parenting, and why we shouldn't categorize our kids with it? Why we need to focus on ourselves as parents, understanding ourselves well, so therefore we can then, parent well, to our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just want to tell you that there are no perfect parents.
Amen to that. Amen.
And there is no perfect childhood.
Yeah.
So parents, you are off the hook.
Yeah.
Okay.
That feels good. That's good to hear that out loud.
When you think about your own childhood, hopefully you have fabulous memories of growing up, but I know for a fact that your parents were not perfect and you did not have the perfect childhood. It doesn't exist. There's only one perfect parent, and that is God, our Father. And I just think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to, be perfect and have perfect children and, protect them from all the things. And So I just think it's important to kind of realize that you're going to do the best you can, and that's what we are asked to do. And one of the ways that you can be the better parent is by being a better child of God. And the
That's so
way
good.
you are
So
a
good.
better child of God is
Yeah.
by being aware of where your struggle is, where your blind spots are, what your core weaknesses are. Be aware of
Yeah.
what those are and call them out so that when they bubble up through your words or your temper or your behaviors or your impatience or whatever, then you can capture them and just give them to Christ, lay them at the foot of the cross and say, okay, Lord, why did I just act that way with my children? What's actually going on here? What am I
That's so
afraid
good.
of? What is
So good.
motivating this? And
Yeah.
hopefully the Enneagram will give you language around that so that
Yeah.
you can capture those things sooner, give them to Christ, seek freedom through repentance and confession, right? And know that he will give you freedom from that. So
that's so good, Mary. I love what you said there about living more into what it means to be a child of God, just right there. And, I really believe this, that the greatest, thing we can ever teach our kids is through our own life example. It's not
absolutely.
about the content that we deliver, but the example we set before them. And,
Absolutely.
as we're exploring this Enneagram, kind of going deeper into our souls and into like our makeup, if you will, into what makes our soul, right? Not just our anatomy, but really our soul. We have to remember that, we want to share an example and, and demonstrate the good qualities, but we're also going to demonstrate our bad qualities as well. They're going to pick up on our fears and insecurities. You may not mention that to them or teach them about it, but they're going to pick up when you're nervous, when you're stressed, when you're angry. So understanding kind of like what you're talking about in the Enneagram allows us not only to process, hey, when those moments happen, but also maybe how we can communicate that to our kids.
Oh yeah.
As well, to help them to understand that inside of them, not label them, but understand like, hey, when we're stressed, I get stressed too. This is how I handle it, and how can we help them develop that in their own lives? I love that. Hey, well, thanks for checking out this latest episode of the Harvest Family Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. But hey, we got bonus content for you because Marianne is back for our part 2 about parenting your personality and how we can use the Enneagram to better understand ourselves so that we can better parent our kids. So make sure you check out that part 2 right over here on our YouTube page or on our Harvest Podcast. We'll see you later, guys. Bye.